Alrighty, welcome back everyone, it's Garland here, and bringing you a new video today is going to be the Tera introduction to the races and the classes. Now Tera is coming up on a 6-year-old game, however it's been recently ported over to console, thus increasing its overall player base. So you might be new to Tera and might not know the classes very well yet. This video is designed to maybe give you a little background on each class so it's easier for you to make a selection in what you want to play. Now right off the bat, the races on console are not showing their racial bonuses. However, they do have racial bonuses. You can simply go and look these up. I'm not going to provide them in this video, but mainly they're PvP related. However, some of them can relate to PvE. As far as the Castanic, it has a increase to your crit damage, so a lot of people roll Castanics if you're DPS, but your race overall doesn't really matter. So we do have the Castanic, the Human, the Aemon, the High Elf, the Papori, the Ellen, and the Baraka. So I did mention that the Castanics do have a crit bonus, while the Baraka also has a resistance to stun. So if you're going to play a tank, you might want to roll a Baraka. All the other races are kind of irrelevant. They don't really matter, so go ahead and pick whatever you're comfortable with. Now jumping right into the classes, we'll try to go alphabetical here, so we're going to start with the Archer. Now, the Archer is a high damage range class that is very simple to learn. It's a good beginning class. It both has charge skills for big damage, and it also has a bunch of fast skills. The Archer is going to be considered a constant damage dealer, unlike like Sorcerer or Berserker that's going to be burst damage classes. So you're going to be constantly doing sustained DPS on the Archer. Now the downside of the Archer is going to be the ping. You're going to be familiar if you're a PC player with ping. You know, the lower ping you have, the more you can spam your abilities and thus making better rotations for DPS. Now on console, we're already limited to our FPS, so higher ping is going to depend on your overall connection. So don't be discouraged if you're not doing a lot of DPS. It could just be your connection, unfortunately. Now, we're going to list these into 3 categories, PvE, Solo, and Survivability. We're going to start with PvE. I'm ranking it very high. The Archer does a lot of damage. Since it's very easy to learn, new players will adapt to it very easily. In the high average damage and high maximum potential damage, it's a great range DPS to get into. Now, as far as your Solo content, we're going to also rate this very high on the charts. He has multiple interrupt and stuns, so if you're in Island of the Dawn, you can stun the BAMs very easily. They also have a lot of mobility and great agility, so you're going to be able to dodge and evade. Now, as far as survivability goes, they do have very low base defense. However, you have very low cooldowns on your invulnerability skills, so that makes up for it. Your race preferences are probably going to be the Castanic for the crit. Now moving right along, we're going to jump over to the Berserker. Now the Berserker is a little different than the Archer. So the Berserker is a slow, hard-hitting melee DPS guy. So you can also wear heavy armor. Now what that means is that he's going to put out a lot of DPS, but it's a little slow. A lot of people think that the class is very easy. However, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. You know, the Berserker is a very difficult class to learn and play. It's very powerful when used properly. Like I said, you have to learn the rotations and everything. It's the only DPS class that actually has a block, so you can block on the Berserker. But the best way and efficient way is to use the block at the end of each skill so you can just end your animations. So it's sort of like animation canceling, anyone familiar with that? The Berserker is very heavily dependent on its gear, since its damage relies on criticals and the block depends on its defensive gear. So gear is a very involved thing with the Berserker. The Berserker also isn't very ping reliant either. You'll be able to survive most things even if you're lagging. Now, as far as the PvE goes, new and, if you're a brand new player and you're not very geared yet, the class is very underwhelming and difficult. You're not going to see those high DPS numbers until you get your tier 9 and tier 10 gear. Once you get fully geared out, that's when the Berserker starts to shine. Now, as far as the solo play goes, the block makes it easier, so when you're in Island of the Dawn, the BAMs, you should be able to go ahead and fight through that. Now, the survivability, the invulnerability skills cannot interrupt any charging skills, so surviving, you gotta kind of plan it ahead of time. You gotta have very high reaction time. Although he has slow movement speed, there's other skills in his kit that will basically make up for it. Your preferred race is going to be probably the Kastonic again. Moving right along, we'll go into the Brawler, which is down here. Now, the Brawler is a tank, but it's also DPS. It's something I like to call as a hybrid. So the Brawler is a high damage tank that's pretty easy to play. The Brawler can keep up their damage and defense by keeping it up their Fury buff. They kind of have another resource. The challenge is to keep this buff up so you can, keep your rotation alive. The Brawler's very ping friendly, so even if you're lagging a lot, you'll be able to play the Brawler efficiently. As far as the PvE goes, the Brawler is not the preferred tank class. However, like I said, it can be a backup tank. It has very high mitigation. The Brawler is something I consider like a monk class. Most of the people that play Brawlers in Tera, you're going to run around the dungeon and gather all the mobs up and then bring them to either the tank, or if you're the tank, you'll gather them and then start tanking, and your DPS will just rain down AoEs on it. As far as the solo play goes, they have very high damage and defense, which makes them very good, if not one of the best in the game, hands down. So Island of Dawn farming on the Brawler should be very easy for you. Survivability goes along with the solo play. It has a very high cooldown and vulnerability, but like I said, it's a tank. You will be able to take a punch. Now the race is locked. It's race locked. You can currently only be a female human for a Brawler. Now on PC, they just introduced you can actually make a male Brawler now. Let's go ahead and jump into the tank, which should be somewhere. Where's it at? Lancer? Where's the Lancer at? Lancer? Lancer. Now, Lancer is going to be the main tank of the game. So if you want to play a main tank, chances are you're going to be a Lancer. It's basically just, very few skills to manage. You're basically going to just gain aggro, and it's all about positioning. You got to learn how to position and learn your rotation. So, the downside of a Lancer is that it's one of the most ping-reliant classes in the game, unfortunately, is the tank. So if you're very laggy, I don't suggest you play a tank, but that's up to you. You have to be able to chain or combo your skills efficiently. So if you have, a lot of lag, you're not going to be able to do that. Now, as far as the PvE goes, it's 100% necessary. You need a tank in every dungeon, as well as a healer in every dungeon, and then your DPS. It's the standard trinity of all MMOs. So if you want to play a tank, then you're always going to have a spot in a dungeon, as long as you're a good tank, obviously. Now, the solo play on the Lancer, you have the high survivability, but you don't have the DPS. So Island of Dawn, you're going to be taking a long time to kill stuff. You're mainly going to be running dungeons on this guy, and then you'll probably make an alternate character as far as your farming goes. Let's go ahead and jump down to the Mystic, which I consider another hybrid. It's not a priest, but it's not a DPS either. However, it has it has the best of both worlds. The Mystic's a unique healer that has more focus on buffs and debuffs than anything else. It does have heals, but like I said, they're not as good as a priest. Mystic can also provide a crit aura, which is pretty much desired in every endgame dungeon, so keep that in mind. Mystics also have to pay close attention to the flow of the fight to know the right time to cast their skills. You want to cast those debuffs when your party is casting their buffs. One good thing about the Mystic, it's not very gear dependent, so even if you have mid-tier gear on it, you'll be fine. Also, another thing about the Mystic, it's very ping friendly, so if you lag a lot, the Mystic might be okay for you. You don't have very solid rotations. Your main goal is to buff, debuff, heal. Now, you also have some DOTs and some minor damaging abilities, but you know, that's what it is. As far as PvE goes, it's very high on the list because usually everyone wants a Mystic in in-game dungeons. Now, the solo play, on the other hand, yeah, it's pretty much ranked at the bottom just for the sheer fact that you don't do a lot of damage. Yes, you have thralls and you have minions and stuff, but they don't do enough damage. So soloing in the Island of the Dawn is not very fun. The survivability, you should pretty much never die. You have self-heals, you can summon orbs. If you die, it's probably your own fault. Let's go ahead and move to the Priest, which is the main healer in the game. So if you enjoy playing that healing class, then the Priest is for you. It has various burst heals, it has shields, and it has support skills. It's basically the lifeblood of the party, guys. The main role, obviously, heals, buffs, some debuffs, and it also can provide damage and vulnerability to others as well, right? I believe so. Or damage debuffs, not invulnerability, but damage preventions. The Priest is not very gear dependent, like I said, so you can, you know, mid-tier gear, you're fine. As far as the PvE goes, it's ranked very high because, you know, every dungeon's either going to want a Mystic, a Priest, or possibly both. Now, the same thing with the Priest as well as the Mystic. Like I said, the solo play, not very friendly. When you're killing stuff in Island of the Dawn, you're not going to have a good time. The Priest has a very, very low DPS. Chances are you're never going to die, but it's going to take you a very long time to kill those BAMs, which goes along with the survivability. I mean, you should never die. It has very high base endurance, and you can basically just self-heal yourself non-stop. Let's go ahead and move to the Reaper. Now the Reaper, you have to level a character to level 40 before you can unlock the Reaper, and then your Reaper will start at level 50. The Reaper is probably one of the very fastest paced DPS classes in the game, and it's very unique, as in it's called a semi-melee range, so you can use melee abilities at a range. It's a very unique class. It's a very highly ping reliant class as well, so if you're very laggy, you might not enjoy the Reaper overall. It has a lot of combos, and you will do decent DPS. As far as PvE goes, it's a mixture of things. Yeah, you could take a Reaper, but you could take other DPS as well. Solo play has 2 stuns and decent mobility, so soloing an Island of the Dawn, you should have no issues. As far as survivability, he does have a cheat death passive that gives him a second chance at life. You also have a life still, so yeah, Reaper is very good for soloing. Let's go ahead and move on to the Slayer. Slayer is a medium-paced DPS that it's very RNG dependent to do damage. The playstyle basically revolves around chaining combos and their steroid, which gives their main damaging skill no cooldown. The steroid is an RNG chance to increase your damage by 25% up to 225%. But there's no reliable way to trigger this guy, so it's completely RNG. Sometimes you'll spawn it, or summon it, or cast it, whatever, and you'll get a 30% damage buff. Other times you'll get a 225%. It's not very reliant in DPS. It's like kind of playing a gambler class. You never know what kind of damage numbers you're going to get. Now, it is a very ping friendly class, so even if you're lagging, you'll be able to do your combos and everything. Now, we rank this mid-tier to low-tier as far as PvE goes, just for the sheer fact that you can't rely on those high numbers all the time, whereas if you bring a Berserker or a Sorcerer, you know they're going to be bringing DPS to the table. Now, the solo play, on the other hand, it has 2 stuns. Solo play is very easy in Island of the Dawn on a Slayer, so it's a good farming alternate character. Their survivability, it has decent survivability. It has double roll invulnerability skills. But like I said, you know, if you want to play the Gambler, then it might be okay for you. Moving into the Sorcerer very quickly. The Sorcerer is the range DPS in the class in the game. You have charge skills for big burst damage, but then you gotta wait for your cooldowns. So that's why it's burst damage. It's not sustainable, constant DPS. However, you will do a lot of damage with the Sorcerer. You just have to learn your rotations and get it down to, you know, your rotation one. Your first skill is over, or I'm sorry, when your last skill is done casting, you want your first skill back up so you can chain your rotations. Now, the only downside to the Sorcerer is it's very mana dependent. You're going to be buying mana potions all the time. As far as the PvE side of thing goes, Sorcerer is pretty good DPS. You know, it's not going to hurt you to have a Sorcerer in your dungeon run. As far as solo play goes, it's a strong DPS class. The cast times are a little long though, so soloing an Island of the Dawn could be a little tricky. You gotta, you know, navigate your way around the monster and just hope for the best. Survivability, it's actually, the Sorcerer actually has one of the highest survivabilities. People tend to think that Sorcerers are squishy, however they're really not. You have some invulnerable skills, you have high mobility, and you have a very high base defense as well. Let's go ahead and move right into the Warrior. The Warrior is one of the fastest paced DPS classes in the game. It's going to be melee DPS, and it has very strong damage. It has a unique edge system that uses skill combos to build the edge. Once you get all your edge built up, you're going to be basically spamming one skill that's called Scythe to bring in, you know, just ungodly amounts of damage. The Warrior is one of the most ping-reliant classes as far as DPS goes. So if you have a laggy connection, Warrior might not be for you. You might not be doing your correct rotations. Now another thing, the Warrior is definitely a hybrid. It's an evasion tank. It can do some off-tanking as well. As far as the PvE goes, it's very high. Warrior is definitely one of the highest DPSs in the game. However, if you random queue, you can queue in as a, you know, a tank, and then you're going to have to learn how to play that tank role as well. As far as your solo play goes, same thing. You do so much DPS to the Island of Dawn BAMs that you should be fine. And since you're considered a tank, you're basically a tank and a DPS. It's like the both, you know, the best of both worlds again. So you shouldn't have any problem with solo play, which go along with the survivability of the Warrior as well. Now you'll notice there are 3 classes missing from the console version, which is going to be the Ninja, the Gunner, and the Valkyrie, so I'm not going to cover them just yet. However, they should be coming in a future update. So that's about it, guys. That's going to wrap up the video. That's just a, like I said, a disclaimer. You know, it's just an introduction to the classes. So if you guys have any questions, please be sure to leave me a comment below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and just get a little glimpse and a little taste of the classes. Maybe you can figure out what you want to play. I suggest trying a bunch of them, finding what suits you best, and then going with it. So that's going to wrap up the video, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.